Welcome back to Dear Future, the podcast where we dive into creativity, technology, and the people reimagining what's possible for tomorrow. I'm Suki, your host, and today I'm very excited to chat with Nikola Todorovic, a CEO, filmmaker, and tech wizard who's shaking up the world of visual effects. Nikola co-founded Wonder Dynamics with Ty Sheridan, yes, that Ty Sheridan, because they wanted to make high-end visual effects something everyone could use, not just big studios with endless budgets. Their main product, Wonder Studio, uses AI to do the heavy lifting, like animating and lighting CGI characters so filmmakers can focus on telling great stories. Before all of this, Nikola was just a kid obsessed with movies, spending hours in VHS rental stores, soaking up everything from sci-fi to dramas. Now he is using cutting-edge tech to change the way we create films. Today, I hope we'll get to talk about his journey, creative process, and what's next for storytelling in the age of AI.
This idea that everything's been done before can be challenged.
I've been dreaming of a computer like this my whole life.
It really made me think more about how our brains work.
It's not coming from anywhere else. It's only coming from us.
Dear Future.
Nikola, welcome to Dear Future.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. So I want to start a little bit with your roots. How did you get to even want to start playing in film and narrative storytelling?
I guess I got obsessed with storytelling as a young kid. Probably when I was 12 years old, I started wanting to make films. That time I really didn't have a camera. I come from humble beginnings, so my family couldn't afford much, but I had internet access, so I started watching tutorials on visual effects. This is early days. Before YouTube, it was this guy, Andrew Kramer, who did Video Copilot. He was giving like After Effects tutorial at the time. And I was born in Bosnia, and then we had to move in the 90s to Serbia and Croatia, and then we would go back, and I would spend my summers at my uncle's. He had a VHS store. I started obsessing and just watching everything I could get my hands on. So then I really wanted to move and work in this industry, but as you're a young kid, living in a small country, you don't really think that's a possibility. You don't think you can make a living by being a storyteller. It's just so far. I always say, like, when you tell your parents you want to be an artist, it's the worst thing you could tell them, right? They're always worried about your future, and especially if you come from like a country where I came from, during the existential concerns about how you're going to survive. Stories for me were always a bit of an escape and inspiration, so I always wanted to do that. Yeah, and then I got in visual effects really early on, mostly because I wanted to direct. I wanted to direct films that were very visually big, and then I started really getting into that problem solving. I think visual effects is really all about how do you solve a problem of something creatively. And then I moved here to study about 2009. Told my parents I'm studying business administration, which I wasn't. I moved by myself. I had one-way ticket and just enough money to buy books. Met a lot of people, kind of took me in along the way, and got a lot of mentors and climbed my way. I was cleaning shelves and computers at VFX houses, and then got first opportunities as a VFX artist, and then a compositor and a supervisor, and then started this company around 2016 with an idea of how can we tell our own stories using technology so we can make it a bit cheaper, more affordable.
So I want us to get to the technology part, but I want to live a little bit more in the space of storytelling, because I think it's so critical to understand the formation of one's philosophies around whether it's media production or what is the kind of life that we want to lead and why be a creative in the first place. When you were in school studying, when you were thinking about what you wanted to do, and then into when you were a VFX artist, what was it that drove you to want to be a creative person within film? There's so many other ways you could be spending your time. This is exhausting. It is expensive. It is filled with a lot of politics. What for you made you feel like filmmaking and narrative filmmaking and this space of visual effects is where I want to be?
Right. I do think you don't realize that at a young age about politics or how exhausting it is. You're attracted by how stories can inspire and change and how global they are. So I guess I always was very attracted to a romantic idea of storytelling, which I still believe in.
You're jaded, but still romantic.
Yeah, exactly. I think for me, it really was a bit about how much inspiration and motivation you can get from a movie. There's one thing like, I used to write scripts, and there's a quote I really like by Alan McKay, who wrote Story Structure. And he said, every scene is about a conflict. Every movie needs to have a conflict, right? Conflict between two characters, conflict between a character and a certain goal. But he also said, what really causes every conflict in the world, whether it's people fighting or a war or something similar, is a true inability to be in someone else's shoes. Because someone can tell you something, but you don't understand them completely because you didn't really live those 20, 30, 40, 50 years through their point of view. So you don't really understand them, and that's where the conflict begins. And I thought movies, we're so busy, and movies take 2 hours to put someone's life into ours so you can understand what that person is going through, right? So to me, that was really one of the main things that I really enjoyed. And the other thing is, I think we're born extremely creative, and we kind of get schooled out of it. I don't know if you ever read or watched Sir Ken Robinson. He does this TED Talk, which I love. Actually, when I was trying to figure out what I'm going to do, right, I was in a school. I wasn't able to get, in a big school to study really film. I ended up in a really small school in Indiana called Grace College through a athletic scholarship. And I was...
Wait, what sport?
It was tennis. I started working when I was about 16 years old, started teaching tennis. So that was my escape. I was lucky enough to end up in the US through that.
Yeah.
There's no other way I could afford it, any other way to go. But I got a scholarship, and I found out that there's a program in LA that I can take for film. But that means I would lose my tennis scholarship. I would have to get a loan and a co-signer, which, as an international student, that's like, I can't do that. How am I going to do that? And I remember I was dying to meet a producer or anybody in the industry, right? When you live in Indiana, it's not really like you meet a lot of film producers, right?
What?
I know.
That place bustling?
It's Hollywood 2.0. But I wasn't sure what to do. Again, my parents thought I was studying business, so it's not really I could call them and tell them. And I emailed this one guy I met. He was a film producer, pretty much like the only film producer I knew. And he sent me this link to that Sir Ken Robinson thing. And he sent me a book called The Element, also by Sir Ken Robinson, all about how we're all born in a certain element. And you can recognize they're really good in this element, right? But you have to make a lot of sacrifices and risk for it. And obviously, I made a huge sacrifice to come here in the first place. Always wanted to do that. And then I guess the closer you are to it, the more fear you have. And I ended up reading that book and watching that talk. And I was like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to pull that trigger. I'm going to risk it all. I'm going to do it. I'm going to move to LA. Didn't know anybody. And then first month or two when I was here, I found out Sir Ken Robinson, he's doing a talk. And I'm like, I'm going to go watch him. And I remember I was late. I couldn't find the location. I'm walking. It's this big kind of open area and met these two ladies. And I was kind of telling them my story, why I want to see him. It's kind of indirectly a reason why I made a decision to make this risk. And they're like, oh, he's our best friend. Come with us after in the backstage. So, I was fortunate enough to meet him. And he was basically said the reason why he writes and tells stories is to touch people like that and young people like that. So to me, you never know who you're going to inspire with a certain story. You never know what kid you're going to touch and inspire to make a certain decision that could potentially change their lives. So long answer is that I really think is that inspiration behind storytelling. It's a really, really powerful medium. And there's a reason why it's one of the oldest things. We tell stories every single day, whether it's through films or talking to our friends. It's all about stories. It's extremely powerful.
It's so powerful. And also so cool that you were able to meet one of your heroes and it went well.
He went really well, yeah. Although he's such a nice guy, so it was one of these coincidences that happened. I had a lot of those happen in my life where it just kind of makes you feel good about certain things and that you made decisions on.
Well, yeah, it makes it feel like, oh, I didn't do this insane thing for no reason.
Right.
There's actually a point to all of this. And as a matter of synchronicity, you also met your co-founder of Wonder Dynamics while working in this space. And so I'd be really curious to hear, as you were in the space of storytelling, of screenwriting and doing VFX and sort of creating the dreams that other people were getting to experience their own selves through another being through, what was it that led you to want to create technology that allowed people to tell stories?
Honestly, it wasn't planned. I studied film, but I also studied IT. I was very interested in technology always. And I think visual effects is very close to technology. VFX kind of breaks through the technology innovations as part of it. And our industry, film, has been driven by technology, even though our industry sometimes doesn't like to admit it. It really much is, right? We met on a film set. I was doing visual effects at the time. The tricky part of our industry, if you work in post-production, is like you can be extremely established in post-production. If you want to go in production, you're kind of starting from zero. And so I wanted to learn and I wanted to go on a lot of sets. And I was fortunate enough to have a friend and a mentor that was like, oh, there's this movie. You can go represent my company and shadow certain departments, right? I was like, I'll do anything. It was an interesting film, Last Days in the Desert. This is back 2013. And I was fresh out of college. And Emmanuel Lubezki was the DP, Chivo. And it was a small crew, about 30 people. And I really wanted to learn. So I'm like, love to go and just watch them work. And it's funny enough, that's exactly what I did. We were in a desert. There were points that I was the guy that cleans the footsteps between the takes because we were in a desert, right? So all the dust. At one point I was locking the set. We were in a desert. There's no one around. There's nothing to lock. I was writing a script while I was locking the set. But it was very, one of those things where time I met, he was very young. He was starting his career at the time. And then he was living in Texas. And I was like, oh, whenever you're in LA, you can crash on my couch if you have auditions, etc. And we really started bonding over the years. And then we started writing scripts together. And interesting enough, like first kind of project we want to do, we're about robotics. So I started researching researching more about robotics. And the more we researched about robotics and kind of self-driving car technology, we started getting these ideas about like, oh, this could be translated into visual effects. We could make this film for much cheaper. Kind of like the Blumhouse model for horrors, but for sci-fi. This is really what we wanted to do. And so as we started doing it and developing this technology, I always say selfishly, because we just want to tell our own stories, and we couldn't get $100 million, I would say $100 million budget, we realized, okay, this technology is maybe a little bit bigger than us. And then we started forming a team, and about 6 months into building a platform, we decided, let's build a platform for everybody. To do it, we'll make our films later. That'll be fine. That's not going to go anywhere. But really, one of these situations was we started with that, and then the kind of turning point was, what's the worst thing could happen? We'll just learn what the future of filmmaking is going to be before everybody else. So really innocently, without knowing how hard it is to do these things, which is good. I always say, if we did know how hard it is, maybe we wouldn't start on this side.
It's that case for being an artist too.
Right.
It's like if you really knew how hard it would be to make a career out of the creative craft, would you ever actually attempt the insanity?
Right.
And so it's amazing that you've been able to take something creative and also move into such a technical space. And I'd love to know a little bit about what that experience is like. We'll get into Wonder, but how do you think about your own practice? Do you think of yourself much more as an engineer, as sort of a director, conductor of other people? What does that look like in your own self-definition and in your own practice? Is it like two parts of your brain, or have they merged pretty seamlessly?
I think definitely I can see the difference if I'm going completely creative versus I think sometimes as an entrepreneur, you turn the other side of the brain, which I'm less excited about, but it's necessary. And then you can fall in a trap of a bit like, okay, I don't feel like I did. But what I realized is engineering part of things is extremely creative. The way they write the code is a different creativity, but it's still extremely creative. I do think sometimes I do miss spending a bit more time, but making tools for creatives, you'll spend a lot of time working on things. You'll find little wins like making a demo or etc., things like that, right? And I obviously still write, and I'd say it's just a little bit different. But if I didn't have the knowledge I had about the filmmaking process, I didn't think we'd be able to make a tool for filmmakers, right? That's kind of the side of it. So at the end of the day, I do think it becomes into problem solving. Even story you can break down in beats, and then you're kind of putting a puzzle in, right? Even when you're compositing a shot on set, you're trying to do that. Very similar with kind of building a product. And I would always say this, like when you're making a film, you're starting a small business, really. You really are. You're starting an LLC, actually, right?
You kind of have to.
You have to raise money, right? Raise money or get a producer or get a studio to fund you. Very similar to starting a startup. I didn't realize how similar it was, right on the side. Actually, you learn a lot of things from building a startup on how to make you a better filmmaker or a better producer or a better director. It's all about like, how do I communicate my vision to someone? Because it really comes down to communication. That's a base level to me of everything, whatever you're doing. When it's working or not working, you can always realize, was the communication correct and where did it break? So I was very fortunate to be around some of the best filmmakers in the world. And you can see they're really good communicators on translating what's in their head, right? And knowing where to push and where they cannot push, knowing what they can get on certain talent. And it's all about surrounding yourself with the smartest and most talented people you can, whether you're starting a startup or you're making a movie. Like we always think there's one director and they're so great and they just did it all themselves. No, they actually are so great, and then the best artists in the world want to work with them. So they're able to recruit these people that will work with them and build. It takes a village, to make all that. Kind of same in a startup, right? It's all about that talent you find, because you're not going to be able to do any of this yourself.
Totally.
So.
One of the things that I have experienced, I come from the film world and was a DP for a very long time, kind of wore all the hats of like director, producer, editor, but mostly in documentary and branded commercial content. And one of the things that I was always amazed by is just how critical translating an idea from one person to the next person is, and how even if you have your vision crystallized for yourself, that each of the people you work with will need to hear it in a different way, and that in that communication you also have to realize that one person's problem is another person's exciting solution that they already have, and for someone else that problem is actually unsolvable and should never ever be approached. And so as someone who in many ways you are directing a startup, you're creating a world of teammates, what have you learned about the kinds of people you want to work with? Because you're working with researchers that are solving ML problems, you're dealing with engineers who are trying to build a product that users are experiencing, and then you're also working with your users who are all artists who want things a specific way, and each of them have a very distinct desire that may or may not be fulfilled by the other. What does that opera look like for you, and how do you think about communicating between those parties?
Yeah, that's a good question. For us, when we started, we realized, okay, we're combining visual effects and CG with AI, ML, and generative AI. At the time, there was no term generative AI. We call it visual AI because really there was no form term. And I realized I needed to find people that understand computer graphics enough and visual effects enough, but they're also really good on the AI side, right? On ML and computer vision. And then you need software developers. It's impossible to find one person that can be expert on all three, but they can be maybe expert in two. And then you got to fight silos really well. I think this is what's happening right now in Gen AI space, is that you have researchers that are solving extremely difficult problems, but they don't come from our space. So we started kind of from the top, let's just prompt a thing. And then you get a certain shot, but then we got to figure out, how do I move a camera, right? What do I need to do in a set? Because if you think about even 3D software tools, visual effects tools, legacy tools, we build them to imitate what we do in real world. We're moving a camera in 3D space. We're animating something, we're changing lighting. So we kind of imitated that. I think with Gen AI, we started from I'm going to get a video or an image, but then I have to manipulate it in a certain way. We will go back to very similar things. We're going to be like, okay, I need to move a camera. I can prompt a camera, but can I really describe how I move a camera? You as a DP, it's very hard to just describe. A lot of times you have to show, no, this is exactly what I want, right? So you can feed it a reference. But I think we're going to end up with a very similar mix between those tools. And I think the reason for that is we're still a bit siloed, right? We're siloed between the filmmakers that know the language and the researchers that are learning the language. And filmmakers don't understand this that well, right? So for me, it's all about fighting silos. But also, I always said, we brought in a lot of young people that are willing to learn. And so if I hire someone who's really an expert of 30 years of knowledge in this space, they will look at that through that lens. They understand. You try to solve a problem a little outside of the box, but when it gets hard, you're going to bring it back in that kind of comfort zone that you understand. So I went with, let me hire really eager people that are smart and willing to learn, just like myself, because I don't know, but I'm confident I can figure it out by doing enough research. And then on the flip side, maybe they know a little bit of that other side, right? That they can also learn more. So I think that's kind of the key. And then it's a fine balance of finding people that have a lot of ego because they're confident in what they do. We're in between two industries with biggest egomaniacs in the world, between film and tech, and I can say that because I met a lot of them. And I thought one was worse than another, but then I started working in the other. I was like, okay, this might be worse. All right. On the side. So I think for me, it's all about find people that are confident enough, but they don't have ego to a point that they're stubborn to admit that they don't know something, to learn new. And I'm one of those. So to me, it's important to find people that will also call you out when you're going that. I have a mentor, of 12 years, this guy I met teaching tennis, because when I first moved to LA, I started teaching tennis on the side to meet these people that can mentor me. I'm a huge believer in mentors. And he said, Nikki, don't believe in your own bullshit. And at first I was like, I don't get what he's talking about, right? And then the more time passed, I realized, we lie to ourselves a lot. We think, oh, yeah, we're so good at this, or we figure this out, right? And then you don't want to admit it, right? And you admit it when it's too late and you realize you kind of failed. So I think you need those people that will call you out on your bullshit before it's too late, right? So for me, it's important to surround myself with those people. And then when you realize that you kind of have yes men people around, that's dangerous.
So dangerous.
Yeah, very dangerous. And so how do we get out of that comfort zone if everybody's telling us, oh, everything you're doing is great?
Right.
And startup is very humbling.
Yeah, because your life is always handing you the things you don't want.
Right.
Well, I want to get into some of those challenges, but first, I think it'd be helpful for people to know who might not have any idea what you're talking about with Wonder Dynamics and might not have any understanding of what these tools are. What's the pitch? What does it do? And who does it help? And why should people try it?
We start with characters. How do I, make films with CG characters quicker? That was really important. So our first product was all about speeding up the process of animating, lighting, and compositing a CG character inside a live action. Then we launched something for animation recently. But our philosophy was AI is just not there yet completely. And in the meantime, build something that will let me extract my information from my shot and get it in a 3D software just based out of that video. So I can get my animation or motion capture out of it without a need for a suit or anything. I can get my lighting info, my camera info, and then I can, if AI gets me 60-70% there, the biggest problem right now with Gen AI is it's a black box. You're stuck with it. And everybody's working on getting it solved. So for us, we went in a way of, okay, if it gets me 60% there, can I extract that 3D data to go in the software that I can push it all the way to the final pixels? I think for filmmakers, it's all about that fine control. You go a lot of back and forward when you're trying to find your shot. So really, that's what we started with Creative Wonder Studio about a year and a half ago. And, we've really built this with mindset of people like myself who wanted to make films like this, but really couldn't afford it, at least to get you going and started and cut the time you needed, cut the cost of it.
And since you've been building, I heard that you were sort of in stealth for a really long time. Were you always set on this idea being the main product, or were there other ideas that didn't quite make it?
Not always. We actually stumbled upon it. We wanted to make something that solves a problem for us. We knew we wanted to, but on a startup, you have to have a North Star, and that's really important, but the way you come to it can be different. Especially in AI, there's a lot of research every day, so you got to resist the urge to try it all, because then you're not going to build anything good. Yeah, we built for about 3-4 years because we knew it will take us a long time to build. But our first actually product was more interactive in nature. We built something that lets you watch a film in the middle of a scene. You can switch into that digital representation and then ask questions. This is early. This was about 2017. So you could ask questions to the AI representation and have a branch narrative out of it.
Whoa.
But it's really early. This is before ChatGPT, so the conversational AI just wasn't there yet.
Totally.
And you would get bored of a conversation real fast.
Yeah, just talking with NPCs.
Exactly. But that really kind of let us think about, oh, if I can do this, I can then make my scene as well with AI. So that's why I said that's where that term visual AI for us before generative AI came to be. So we did do a pivot at that point, which is really good. I think sometimes when you're building a product, you got to be agile. We learned a lot during that first process, right? And we probably wouldn't start reading some of this research if we were just thinking about visual effects products necessarily.
So you've been on this journey. You've been sailing the rough seas of entrepreneurship. And in many ways, it sounds like you weren't always sure exactly what the problem you were solving was going to be, or maybe what the solution to the problem was.
Yeah, we had a vision early on when we kind of realized that pivot. We had a very clear vision from a standpoint of myself, who was a VFX artist and a supervisor, and Ty, who was an actor who spent a lot of time in motion capture. We knew that first film we wanted to do was about robots. So we're like, how do we make this easier for us so we can do it for 5 to 10 million versus 100? So that was our North Star. So we knew what we wanted to do with it, just we didn't know exactly how to get there. We had elements, right? And then you go in, and so I think for us, we built around 25 Gen AI and ML models that are running in the background. And I think what drove us also accessibility. That was a big one for us. So we're like, gotta make sure this works in a browser, everybody can access it and have that.
What were the things you learned along the way? I'm sure you are a wealth of lessons. And as someone who also believes in mentorship, for those who might be looking for mentorship, what would you tell them if someone is out there looking for tales from the land of entrepreneurship? What would you share are the most salient lessons that you learned along the way? Technical or practical?
Yeah, I would say kind of same as going out to be a filmmaker. There's no one way to do it. I'm a huge believer you can learn it on your own. There's a lot of sacrifice you got to do. For us, when we were starting, first 3.5 years, as a startup, you don't take any salary out. You work on the weekends, whatever job you can, right, on the side. So you got to be okay with sacrificing, and you got to be okay that it's going to take way more longer than you think it will take. It's never a year or two, right? And then people don't see that, because what I learned early on, when you listen to certain success stories of really successful individuals, they will tell it to you after it was done. There's this quote I really like, says be careful whose advice you take, because advice is a form of nostalgia. It's like a painting out of a garbage can that you take the pieces off and then look at it, looks good. So I love that quote, because I was always trying to no, tell me about the weeks where you had mental breakdown. Tell me about the weeks where you wanted to quit. Tell me about the weeks where it seemed so impossible and you doubted yourself you can do it. We don't hear that. We usually hear motivational part, which is great, but you're summarizing 5 to 7 years into, few sentences that you're trying to tell someone how great you are at something, right? So for me, I would give advice to everybody, it's okay to have those moments. And number one thing I would say is the grind, and you have to not give up. I know so many people that gave up when they were 5 minutes from success because they doubted. Before we launched, I thought our product, maybe a day before we launched the demo, I was like, we wasted 4 years. It's not good. Nobody's going to like this. It's going to be terrible. But that's me. I'm a pessimist before these kind of moments. And I was
realistic and helpful.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, okay, calm down. It's not that. It's not going to be
Eat
that.
a cookie, sit in the corner.
Yeah, and then we launched. It went viral, and it's we got every major studio knocking on our door, and very fortunate to have people like Spielberg and Joe Russo, who we ended up doing a movie with. But in these moments, you will doubt yourself, and you're gonna think, maybe I'm not as good as this person, right? That you admire, that you want to be like. I would say just keep pushing at it. Number one lesson is also I learned on startups, it's timing. Be okay that sometimes maybe your timing's not right, but that doesn't mean your next idea won't be as good. And it's really execution. Everybody has ideas, and it's a roller coaster of emotions. It's just like making a movie. That was one of the greatest filmmakers I ever met. I don't want to name them, but they said they almost want to throw up before every film they start doing production. And I was like, no way, because this person's done some of the greatest films ever. And you start thinking, if they feel that, why am I scared and not wanting to push because I don't want those feelings or I don't like those emotions, right? So I do think it's the doers a bit. We have the dreamers. I'm a dreamer, but sometimes you become too much of a dreamer, and then you meet someone who's a doer and you're so annoyed how they just do it. They just make movies, but you're like, but I have better ideas.
They're
right?
like tanks. You're just going for it.
Exactly. So I do think number one advice would be believe that you can learn everything you don't know, and just don't quit moment when you feel like it's too hard. You're going to have moments where you definitely want to quit. Just like go over those humps, see it as a normal part of the journey.
Yeah. One of the things I want to talk about is just sort of philosophically.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things you mentioned earlier, which I very much agree with, is that filmmaking has always been a space for technological innovation. I mean, you have to be in order to make the kinds of things you want to make, from cameras to lenses to lighting. I mean, you just have to be really advanced. And I'm curious, as someone who's at the forefront of building the tools and building the platforms that a lot of new storytellers are using to create never before told stories, what do you feel like the industry is and is not understanding about these kinds of tools?
I think for me, I'm always been a big fan of indie filmmaking. But if you study history, the studios were actually created by sort of independent producers because the industry started because, invention of cameras. And Thomas Edison actually had a full monopoly on them. The first film studio was in New Jersey. So Edison Company had basically rights on film cameras and projectors. They had Nickelodeon at the time, which were theaters. And if you wanted to make any kind of film, you had to pay licensing fees to Thomas Edison Company. So there were these producers that were tired of that monopoly. And they said, we're going to move to a little small town in California called Hollywood. It was a farmland. They're like, we can go film there. There's beach, there's mountains, and the judges are a little bit more convenient. And by the time someone from New York comes, back in the day, traveling took forever. By the time someone comes, we could be done with filming to go and enforce the law. So actually, Hollywood started because someone wanted to escape the monopoly of hold on technology. A lot of people don't know this, right?
It's a great story.
Yeah, and so I think it's very important that we should not look at new technology as something we're scared of, that someone will have control over. I'm excited about AI long term because it's all about expanding access to someone to be a storyteller.
Right.
I was very fortunate to move to LA, and it took a lot of luck and persistence
And great.
to be here, right? But a lot of people that I know that are extremely more talented than me didn't have that chance. So I think that should not be the case. We should hear best storytellers in the world. And that's kind of what social media did in a way, right? Give voices to certain people across the world. I do think this industry tends to forget that a photo camera, when it first came out, painters, they were not seeing that as art. It was not considered art. You just click the button. That's not art, right? So it's very interesting how that works. I do think it is important we build it internally with storytellers and artists in mind. I don't want to see a future where an actor sitting at home licensing their likeness. We're watching, synthetic representation of them with a movie that's completely generated by computer and AI. I definitely don't want to see that. I see more AI as a tool. How do I speed up this process and cut down the cost? I think filmmaking is too expensive. It shouldn't cost $200 million to make a movie.
Totally.
Right? So for me, that's where I'm excited about, is where this technology is coming to. But it's coming. It will be existential crisis. Our industry should not be tied to a certain small location in the world. That's what drives me. That's why we were building these tools, because we saw these opportunities, like this change is coming and it should happen. So these voices we're going to discover with it will be big. And at the end of the day, it's not going to replace talented people, because talented people will figure out how to use these tools. Being a good artist is about having a really good eye.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't teach that. It takes experience. And I know this. We have artists in our team, and it takes experience from a junior to a senior artist. They just don't have the eye. They don't recognize if something's good enough to be pushed and sent to a director, etc. So I do think that's where it's going to be. It's not how we made it. I do think these artists that are working now, they're really experienced. They'll do much better with these tools than someone who's just hoping to hit a good prompt or something on the side. So I do think that's where the fear is coming from, unknown. And the more you look, the more you realize, okay, I should learn this because I feel like I'll do better things.
Yeah. I had a similar experience too, in that I think I was really lucky. I started becoming obsessed with AI before the world could get scared of it. And so in that way, I evaded the anxieties that plagued so many of my colleagues because I had the existential crisis early. And then in having that, recognizing that I wanted to understand. So a friend of mine who is very wise used to work as a kayak instructor, and he was a river guide. And he was telling us a story about how when you're leading people down a river, the advice that you give is to face your fears, to move the boat towards the rock that you actually don't want to be going towards, because the river will move you.
Oh, I'll be terrible at it.
Right? Is to face your fears and slow down. And so you actually then like move your paddles in a way that you're sort of looking at it, but letting the river sort of move you away from it, rather than trying to fight and be pushed against it. I thought that was really thoughtful advice, and also in many ways my internal inherent gut reaction to when I first confronted what generative AI was, which I know it wasn't always called that, but in my understanding that a machine made this thing, and maybe it wasn't as good as it would become, and it was just a seed of the potential that it could be, it was still the beginning of something new. And I I needed to pay attention. So I turned to face it.
Yeah.
And in that facing, realized, oh, this is actually confronting my own fear of change.
Yeah.
And so I need to really get clear on what I am afraid is going to change and what I'll lose.
100%. Change is hard. And I think, my co-founder Ty and I were talking to people about, okay, AI is coming. This is like 2018. We're trying to educate people. We were going on these talks, etc. And it was sci-fi to people. They were like, I don't know what you're talking about, right? So you're
down the road.
Yeah, so you're right. I think we were similar. We kind of went through that education early on. But I think bottom line is this. Can I produce everything I imagine right now with the techniques we used and the way we produce and make films?
Yeah.
It's extremely hard. You
So
always sacrifice something you can write to get on a screen. And to me, that's what AI is about. Like, I can imagine a story. I want to tell a story. Can I tell the story easier? I'm still telling the story. I'm not asking a computer to tell me a story.
Yeah.
Right? So I understand the fear, but I do think if you look at the fear, a lot of people that were not lucky enough to break in Hollywood or storytelling are so scared of the process of filmmaking. It's just if you're in it, you understand the process of filmmaking. And this, what it's doing is expanding and democratizing that access. And so, like every technology, you can build it. But I do think like with every technology, just like editing, editing used to be huge warehouses of mostly women sitting and cutting film. There was no Oscar for it. Nobody thought it was an art. And then computers came, and one editor now gets an Oscar, and it's extremely important part of filmmaking process. But there were a lot of people that were like, when that came out, that were saying, that's not art. That piece is not art. You're cutting film. I think a lot of time these tools are making these roles and shaping these roles. And VFX is scary because these softwares have shaped roles like texture artist. I have a groomer. I have someone who's just, working on animation, someone who's just working on hair. But that was necessity by these tools, right? So I do understand that fear. And obviously as a compositor, same, right? You have this fear. So it's not unjust fear.
Yeah.
But you have to adapt. I had this one VFX artist I used to work with, and she would watch tutorials. She was a senior who worked on some of the greatest films, and she would watch tutorials on FX Guide, FX PhD. And I was like, why do you watch? She's like, if I don't learn and adjust, I can, be out of my job. So you have to always keep learning it.
So as a perpetual student, as it sounds like you are, and I am as well, one of the things that I also feel really passionately about is naming and understanding where I'm having my own crisis of faith. And so in the interest of not making it taboo, I am curious, what are the things that you are concerned about and worry about, whether they're technical challenges that you're trying to overcome, or even concerns around society and the industry, or even personal challenges with your own relationship to these tools. I'm really curious what keeps you up at night.
A lot of things.
Tell me about some.
Yeah. I'm very pessimistic in short-term things, which kind of drives me to do certain things because I'm always like a perfectionist. So I'm never happy with certain things I'm doing that day or that week or that month. Didn't push it hard enough. It's not the vision. Same with film. When I direct something or make, I'm never happy. Just like every artist, you're never happy with it, right? But I'm very optimistic long term. So I hope we try not to control some of these things too much in a sense of like, for the sake to protect the way we're used to doing things, right? Because it's not just about us or this small pocket of an industry. Right? Because if you talk to people outside of Hollywood, they don't care that much about our industry and how things are made. They're watching a movie. They're enjoying a movie. But we get so obsessed in our industry about, no, this is the way it's to be.
You've got to use that anamorphic lens. It's going to be terrible.
But I do think like, if we remind ourselves, it's all about making stories. It will come from people that want to make these stories. So how do we have access? So I don't know. Depends on the day, on how I feel and what worries me. But I am generally very optimistic in which way this industry is going. Because I am a big believer. It shouldn't be gate-kept. Our industry is gate-kept for hundreds of years. And as I mentioned earlier with the Edison example, there's this dying need for us to be creative and to be able to be creative, right? The irony of it is this. AI was meant to be made to help us have more time to be creative, right? Robots, etc. To help us not do monotone jobs that nobody really likes, but we have to do, right? There's a lot of repetitive job out there that you have to do to survive. And that's what the idea of AI existed for many, many years. It's not a new fear. If you read books by Asimov, they had concepts of artificial intelligence that we were scared of that will end us, right? But the irony and why I think people are scared of is that one of the first parts that got affected is the creative aspects of it. if you think about it, right? So we went from like, we're making this to help us have more time to be creative. Oh, by the way, these tools
They're going to make you...
or eyes of a robot that we made is helping build these tools that will cut some of that creativity down so we can be quicker with storytelling. So it's a bit of ironic, and I understand why it's a controversial subject, but I think the long-term goal of this technology is a very positive and noble one.
The long arc of history.
Exactly.
I guess I'd love a little window into some of the technical challenges that you talk about. We also have some listeners who are very, very technical engineers, are really excited about a lot of these tools, are really up on all of the models. You know, they know what's happening with Flux and what's happening with Midjourney, and they're aware of all of the open source models, and they use IP adapter, and they're really excited about testing, mixing, matching all of the different tools together. And I think it is a real gift and a pleasure to have someone who is building some of these tools that's here, not just a sort of tester and experimenter. And I'm curious if you could give a little window into what are some of the technical challenges and how are you trying to overcome those technical challenges?
I'm a big believer in being in 3D space and understanding the 3D space and what's happening in the background in your shot, whether it's character animation or camera move, etc. The biggest challenge that I see is, we have kind of two approaches. One is trying to guess pixels and understand pixels of it. And it's very hard to get a certain data that understands all that so you can train your models correctly. That's the first one. We went with an approach with synthetic data and massive synthetic data. Some of the biggest challenges we had is that you're trying to build something with an input that is not meant for it. So film language is very specific. Camera moves in film are extremely specific. So when we first started, we realized, for instance, for like AI motion capture or pose estimation, if you want, most of the training data available was shot for games where it's a full shot of an actor from an up here angle. But we had this internal test we called PTA, Paul Thomas Anderson, Boogie Nights shot, right? Where we were like, okay, we have to recreate this for the model to understand what this movement is and how it relates to a character. So we are basically building foundational models to understand, even though we went with these characters, that was something we could market and we could present. But really our long-term mission is, how do I build foundational models that can really understand and break apart every single thing they see? How do I understand the camera, relationship between the characters, what they're doing, and how I can understand light sources? So basic film language on the top of that will help us control each aspect of it. So for me, the biggest challenge is breaking down holistically these models to understand each of it. Because right now I have a fear that sometimes we go in a certain research part, especially in like AI video or text to video or some of these diffusion models, the foundational models reach a plateau and then we try to optimize, make it a bit better and bit better. And it's usually like a 6 months or so windows where we see like, okay, we can push it, but not more than this, right? So I do think these foundational models will change, they keep changing. And the exciting part is, like, as you say, before our tools were made by a smaller group of people or VFX companies that did not have that many engineers. Now everyone in the world is trying to figure out make this, because honestly, a lot of them are making for social media because that's where the money is. And a lot of VCs, fund companies that go with that, they're not making for film. We are very much focused, how do I understand that film language to the point that I have a holistic approach and I can control it? Because to me, if you have something that's a black box, you can get 80% there, but if you cannot push it all the way, you're gonna spend more time trying to fix that on the side. So it's a bit of that. We went to the other way, like, let's start with that holistic and break it apart. It's okay if it's not perfect, but we're gonna build a building block to separate a character, to separate environment, to separate what camera is doing, and to separate what light is doing.
This is fascinating. And as a very nerdy question, how do you teach a model how to think about motion if it's not actually seeing the motion, right? One of the things that's always a challenge is when you're giving a model a shot, it's actually seeing what's happening in the frame.
Right.
And so to describe a drone shot, you're actually describing the mechanism or the gears or the tool that is creating the experience it's seeing, but it's never actually in the visual field.
Right.
And so I'm just so curious how you guys have thought about that.
Yeah, for instance, like for motion capture or markerless motion capture or pose estimation, however we call it, we have something recently launched. It's called motion prediction, because the occlusion is a big problem. You have a lot of actors in a shot, you have objects, you don't see the full body. So we built something that basically took us about a year. We call motion prediction, which is, okay, see just the upper part of the body. Can I guess if they're sitting or standing? Or if you walk behind an object and you have like steps like this and then you lose me and then I continue walking? We built something that works on a probability basis, which is like, I can see your hips, or I saw like 10 frames before I lost you. Maybe I can guess based on all the data what you're doing. And then you just got to feed it very diverse data on the side of things so you can see enough of that motion and learn in a sense. And a lot of times the model will hallucinate positively. So there's things like reinforcement learning Started with robotics, really, is where you're rewarding it. Oh, this is good behavior. This is good behavior. Keep doing this, or this is bad behavior, right? So I think it is very fascinating how much you can push sometimes these models. There's obviously limitations with a lot of it, but it's quite entertaining to me when you're fighting with something for 10, 11 months, you're getting nowhere, and then you get a little bit of a breakthrough on the side. Like this one for us was really exciting because it's an important one. One thing that's interesting, watch a movie and see how many times you can see feet on actors. It's not a lot. It's not a lot. Next time you watch a movie, pay attention to that. Because when we were first testing, we're trying to test and see wide shots. And then we're looking at wide shot, we're like, there's not a lot of shots where you can see feet clearly for the entire shot, right? Usually it's a little bit cut, etc. And you don't see many of them clearly. Random thought, but that's that film language. Is you gotta adapt it to certain styles of cinematography we'll learn. And I just end with, we build it that the input and the output are related to the quality of that artist. So our lighting and everything is estimated based on the input. If you feed it iPhone footage, it's gonna match it. It's not gonna look great. But if you feed it extremely cinematic footage, it will try to match that look.
Right.
Same with the camera moves, same with the characters. Your character has to be really high quality build for that output to be good. That was important for us because we wanted to preserve a bit, of that quality of your artist, whether it's on set or whether it's someone who's building a character.
Right. And for you, what have been some of the most maybe surprising or unexpected breakthroughs that you didn't imagine you would experience either in building the tool or even things the model did that you didn't expect that surprised you?
Oh, there's a lot of moments like that. I think ML research and just generative AI research is tricky because it's very visual. Sometimes you're going to get better math. And I always say this, researchers are sometimes doing research papers which are different intention in building a product. Sometimes research page where you want to get in SIGGRAPH or somewhere. So you improve the math, but maybe visually it's not that better of a result.
Yeah.
That kind of surprised me early on, is that sometimes the math would be maybe not that much better in the background, but visually it just made such a big breakthrough. And one of the people we worked with was Anjo Kanazawa, who's out in Berkeley, and she was really good at saying, I've noticed how much visual effects and film is similar to building Gen AI, because it's all about, you look at the result, you're like, does this look good? Oh, it does look good. Okay, good. I can push this model more. So I guess these surprises to us came that sometimes we had something that didn't work for 8, 10 months. The first iteration was almost 3 years. And then it happens and you're like, yes, this is what we wanted on the side. So I guess it goes similar to building a startup. It's just, you gotta be stubborn and keep pushing.
That's great. Last question is just, as you've been building this tool, you've really gotten a chance to see the beauty and the ugliness in the interstitial spaces between storytelling and machine learning. And from all the experience that you've gained, you also have insight into where this is going in a way that no other people do. I'm curious from your vantage point, not what is your prediction for the future, because my God, that is just the most overused question. What is the ideal future for you to be serving to human beings?
I'd say 5 years, 100 years in AI, I think this is a little bit something we're getting from media a little bit more. A lot of this research has been going on for 20, 30 years. It's not that new for a lot of people. It's just that public, it's very new. So it seems it's moving fast, but it also takes a lot of time. And sometimes with this research, you're going to make progress and you think, oh, great, we're almost there. And then you're going to spend another 3-4 years trying to break through something. Yeah. It's an interesting one.
20%.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And I do think what we're trying to build tool-wise is, how do I control fully to the final pixel every single element of my shot like I would now? So think about it this way. You have tools like Maya, Blender, etc., right? They are meant to let you control. That's why they're so complex, because they're meant to let you control every single small element of it. Unfortunately, they were built so complex that not everybody can use it. Our long-term goal is, how do I build a tool that is simple enough to use, but I can push it to the final pixel? That's why I'm a big believer in that holistic 3D representation of certain elements, just like we do in 3D world, because we live in 3D world and we make films in 3D world for a reason, because of that communication. So that's really what we want. This is foundational models that we build, that we are building on top of that with that in mind. And to me, I know it's good when I'll have someone who really can speak the language of filmmaking and they will instinctively understand, oh, I see, I want to do this, right? We want to get rid of a little bit of that slot machine that we have with Gen AI right now.
Totally.
There's a lot of it. And there's a reason for it. It's very early. It's a hard research problem to solve. But to me, it can be solved if you separate. Don't try to do it all in one, because it's very complex. And someone told me the other day, if I'm making something for social media, something funny, I'm not going to care so much about every detail in my shot because I'm turning around really fast. But if I'm telling a story I want to inspire a million people with, and I really want to put in everything I have to tell maybe my childhood story to inspire another kid. I want to tell a story of a memory where it's really important for me that this carpet is this color. It's very important that this emotional expression is there, because you can't really describe that with words. I can't describe emotions with words. I have to perform it. So that's where you communicate. Sometimes it's a lot of back and forth just to make sure that they understood what you wanted in that shot. And you have to do it with a trial and error. Like, when you're making like mise en scene in a shot, you're going to move that backlight 30 times to try to figure out where it is. You cannot randomize it because you're trying to get it to the point where you want. So that's really the goal for us, is how do I get it to the point that we can do that in real world, and I can do it now with that combination of AI and some traditional tools. I think it will move more and more towards those tools that will be easier to use.
Is there anything that for you right now feels impossible but would be insane to have in the future? I want to know what science fiction looks like for you.
Ooh, that's a good one. If you look at like sci-fi or like holodeck from Star Trek, I think we might end up there. I'm not sure we're talking about 50 or 100 years in the future, but I do think instinctively we will want to be in a space where I can touch and feel and communicate. So to me, I do think if you ask me for a future down the line, we're going to see films being made instinctively by a way smaller group of people with the kind of communicational skill of the way we do it now. Like telling this, I want this, and then showing it, I want this, and then moving it, I want this. Because right now, the way we operate with a mouse and move, it's not instinctive. We'll see. Every generation will do differently. We have kids now that are 4 years old that know how to use iPhone really, really well. To them, what we use now in 20, 30 years will be so ridiculous. They're going to ask, why did you do it this way? We don't know any better. It's easy to look back and say, they were stupid. But it's very hard to look forward and be like, what is it that we're doing now that is really stupid? And they laugh at us. I do think that's why we have a certain instinct that's very natural. That's why the way we build certain tools. I personally love being on set, but I also love being on a computer and having that kind of like artistic alone time where I'm tinkering with a shot forever on the side. So it's a bit of a mix, and I think these tools will help us figure out how do we build this? How do we tell this story?
Great. Holodeck, here we come.
That's really long in the future.
I guess the last thing that I always do with my guests is I ask them to say something to the future, starting with the words, "Dear future."
Okay, that explains it. It's a full circle moment. Okay,
Full
all right, I was
circle,
wondering.
landing the plane.
Okay, why would I want to tell the future? I would say, I guess, dear future, maybe forgive us. We didn't know any better. We didn't know what we were doing. No, I would say I'm a fanatic of sci-fi, maybe because I love the idea of thinking about the future and what it can be. And it's very exciting. Sometimes kind of depressing when you're like, why am I not born in a century where we don't have this issue, or where we don't have interstellar travel and meet other species and, coexist? But it's very fascinating how right now we are in that period where we're seeing self-driving cars and robots walking, which seemed sci-fi, not that long ago. So I guess what I would say to the future is, don't think you reached the end, because we like to have this thing where we think we're so smart. We've reached the peak of evolution, and some before were really stupid. But really, when you start reading some of these, not to sound too pretentious, but like Plato's Symposium is really fascinating to me. First time I read it, it's a small book, but first time I read it, I was so fascinated. They had same issues, same problems, same thoughts, same doubts in their mind like 2,000 years ago and more, 3,000 years ago. And you're thinking, oh wow, the tools don't really matter. The technology doesn't really matter. It's really a means to an end. At the end of the day, it's really like about that human thought process we have and the inner fight. And that's why I like storytelling and writing in general. Going back to, like Story Structure, that book by McKee, is when you write, you put yourself in different characters. And you try to realize, well, I am kind of like this one person. I'm kind of like this person as well. Oh, wow, I do have a little bit of this person. They realize we're very similar. We're so similar. Everybody is very, very similar. So I would say, like, dear future, doesn't matter what technology or advanced you have. At the end of the day, you're going to deal with the same issues and same problems and same questions. The deep down is all about, am I really helping people around me and making them feel better and giving them what I would want to receive? That's not going to change depending on what technology we have. So I think like technology should help us do things better, but we should not be obsessing about what, like, is this driving our life? I don't think it should be driving our life. It should be a helping tool.
Chef's kiss.
I don't know about that, but yeah.
That was great. I think what's nice is that there's iterations, right? And so we got there. I really appreciate the time.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me.
This has been amazing.
I love the philosophical talk. That's why I can go forever on that. So it's fun to talk about that.
We can do more. This is just the beginning. But yeah, I just wanted to say, like, thank you again for joining us. Thanks for sharing your story, your insights, your wisdom is so helpful and necessary in this time when so much is changing. I think having folks like you that are bastions of creativity and sort of leadership in the space, but also who are really grounded in what it means to be human and why we're doing any of this in the first place is really...
I have to take you in my meetings. The way you pitch me, it's like way better than the way I think of myself. So I should probably like...
Yeah, I'll be your...
Get you intro me. Yeah.
It's great. I'll start all the conversations. Listen, I'm here as the official representative.
I'm just going to intro Nikola and then I'm going to leave.
Yeah, I'm just here for 3 seconds. I think I'm really, really grateful for this time, and I'm also grateful for the work that you're doing. It's really inspiring, and I hope that you continue doing that work and keep showing the world and folks around you what's possible and keeping the kind person that you are. I'm really excited to see
Likewise. It's really important what you're doing. I think a lot of people are hungry for information, and sometimes you don't know where to go to get certain information. So thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. So for our listeners, if you haven't already checked out Wonder Dynamics, please go do that. Wonder Studio is available for folks to use. Remember, the tools might change, but creativity is all about finding your voice and using it to tell the stories that matter to you. This is Dear Future signing off. And I also want to give a big shout out to Echo Bend. You have been such champions of this show. Thank you for having us in the studio. Thank you for producing the show. We're so grateful, and we'll see you next time.
Dear Future.